Welcome to the Level Set. We are happy here to have you here with us today. I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Charles Alexander and the Mike Jones. And I think we have an important show today. Many of you all may have missed what I would consider a master class that Dr. Alexander put on this week, talking about adverse childhood experiences, I believe. They're called ACEs. And he gave just an incredible expose, and I will allow you to look that show up on a different platform, and we'll have to give you the address to that sometime in the show. But what, with respect to ACEs, these are things that are pertinent, and as Dr. Alexander states, every day is Mental Health Day on the Level Set, and we are going to dive into that with respect to these ACEs. My question to Dr. Alexander is back to these adverse childhood experiences. There's trauma and there's anxiety and there's palpitations and so forth. My question is, when you experience that trauma as a child and you find yourself in a high intensity situation, is that so? So you have, we'll say, a physical assault, or you witness a physical assault of a parent. There's a trauma associated with that. Then you have anxiety associated with a history exam that you have coming up. I want to know, is that the same triggering sort of anxiety that you associated with? And then at a larger scale, as Black people, we've suffered certain trauma. And Mike Jones, my question is going to be, is, the trauma that we've endured or suffered in the United States, is that trauma one of the reasons why we fail to advocate for Africa, and why we are unable to do what Marcus Garvey wanted us to do in terms of setting up an economic uh, relationship with Africa, like the vast majority of individuals have done. So, I mean, they're loosely based, but I think they are sort of, there's a reason why we fail to do what every other ethnicity has done, which is to advocate for their home state, for their homeland, and create commerce. And I understand that there are some obvious things, the opposition to that. I understand that people want to pick Africa clean. I understand that they treat uh, Blacks in America, the government treats Black in America the same way they treat African countries, and we'll get into that. But that's my larger question. Dr. Alexander, please.
So great questions. Hello to the audience. And so, we have to start with ACEs. So ACEs, as Attorney Fields said, adverse childhood experiences. Everybody is subject to ACEs. What really kind of varies is the number of ACEs that people have. This became a thing on the West Coast. I think it's Kaiser Family Foundation, I think it is. They did some research of adults in the healthcare setting, because somewhere somebody had already kind of hypothesized that there was a relationship between childhood trauma and health. And so when they did it, these were all, people, middle-aged folks, and they all had some healthcare issue. And what they found was that, the overwhelming majority of the people that were being treated for whatever their malady was had some level of childhood trauma, right? And so what we need to know about that is that childhood trauma is dose dependent, meaning that the more trauma you have, the worse outcomes you have going forward. And so, to your question, about triggers, right? The short answer is yes. Like, so if you have that, like, that's part of how we know the severity of the trauma. And so one of the things, like one of the symptoms for post-traumatic stress disorder is hypervigilance. And so the hypervigilant person is beyond self-aware, hence hyper, right? Like they are looking for, like wherever they are, they probably sense a threat. And they are looking and anticipating that threat. And we know that it's hyper because there is no threat, right? Like in their environment, there's no reason, in a given environment, there's no reason for them to perceive it otherwise. There's no reason for them to anticipate that something bad is about to happen, but that's what trauma can do, right? So that's one manifestation. Another manifestation of, or another symptom of post-traumatic stress is, intrusive thoughts and memories. And so, like, you're literally having, intrusive thoughts, memories, or flashbacks. You're literally seeing yourself in that traumatic space. And so something can happen in anything. Like it could be, any sensory experience. So like if you got beat in the kitchen while the adult was baking, whenever you smell fresh bread, you go back to that moment. Right? If your trauma is basketball related and the coach talk crazy to you all the time, somebody blow a whistle, you can go back to that space. Right? And so it's any kind of sensory piece. It could, touch, like people can be very, very sensitive to the touch because people have been touching them inappropriately, in whatever way that can manifest, right? And so any sensory piece, smells, sights, sounds, tastes, so however you can perceive the environment, your mind can get locked into, like, some of the more prominent sensory experiences of the moment that is attached to your trauma. And from that point forward, that can be, whenever you're having a similar sensory experience, you can be triggered.
Wow, that is so so what you're saying is, and I just want to follow up quickly before we go to the Mike Jones. If in fact I have suffered childhood trauma, and or it's not unusual for my grades to slip because that's a high intense situation every time I have to take an exam. And in order to avoid that anxiety, I will check out or, yeah, or, avoid that situation.
I mean, it could be that, or it could be so. Like any, so yes, so you can be triggered by the, by the emotional intensity, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to connect to your. It doesn't always have to connect to your original trauma. It can be the feeling state, right? And so the fact that you get excited at all can be problematic for you. because the chances are, in the trauma situation or trauma situations, it's not uncommon for there to have been some issue with emotional regulation, right? And so, like, you get into a situation, and the problem with emotional regulation really can come from the fact that the traumatized person isn't in control in the situation, right? They're being victimized. And so no matter what they do, the trauma doesn't stop. And so that in and of itself has a dysregulating, impact. And so you can certainly get into situations going forward where affect at all is threatening, regardless of the source, like whatever is prompting a particular affective state.
Wow. Thanks, Dr. Alexander.
Yes,
I
sir.
appreciate that. Mike Jones, what are your thoughts on the initial question as we spoke?
Charles did. I got a trigger, and it's not a problem, but it does make certain things difficult for me. And that is when somebody asks a question, it normally does trigger a higher thought. Okay, I don't have ability to stay. So I've never thought about what Charles just said, but when he said it, you might have saw me taking notes. And so here's the note that I made. To be alive in the world is traumatic. Right now we talk about trauma as it's abnormal, but to be alive in the world is a traumatic experience. And in fact, the most traumatic thing we might experience is birth. Matter of fact, birth is so traumatic, none of us remember it. Okay? So you're a conscious being when you're coming through the birth canal. But literally, we have no memory, either subconscious or whatever, that anybody can think of birth. So that's a traumatic experience. So it seems that trauma is a function of the human condition. So my question for Charles then becomes, why are some people immobilized by trauma and other people are able to manage it in ways that doesn't create dysfunction for them as we understand what it means to function normally? Okay, because I don't know how we are all men and fathers here, and so we had fathers, and something you'll tell your son and you got told is, well, boy, son, you have to handle that. Okay, I mean, at the end of the day, whatever the issue was, you didn't get chance. Your father figures, once you got to a certain age, didn't hug you like your mother. They said, yeah, I get that, but you got to deal with that. And so that became the norm for how you handle trauma, I guess. And you had to figure it out. Some of us did, others obviously didn't. But I think, and I'm not a subject matter expert nor trained, but one of the things you look for in athletes is mental toughness. And by mental toughness, we're talking about the ability to play through mistakes, bad games, being down in the game. Are you capable of persevering through that? And that seems to me to be the question for this issue for us. Not how do I take trauma out of your life, but how do I get you strong enough to deal with it. And I'll stay with it, and then I'll shut up. But I'll stay with the issue of weights. The reason athletes you end up in the weight room for two reasons. One, you got to get physically bigger and stronger just to play. But the process of building that strength requires you to lift weight that you had never lifted before. And everybody has to get to the point in that third set of reps at the maximum weight you're starting to approach, and you want to quit, and maybe the weight coach said do it for the kids that can't. But the point is forcing yourself to keep pushing means you always got something in the tank. So in the moments in a game or a contest, you say when your body tells you you're done, your mind tells you, no, we ain't. And you go back and find whatever that reserve is, the resilience. So for me, I think that was a fascinating question, but my response to it wasn't how do you eliminate it? The question was, how do I put you in a program that no matter what it is, you're able to deal with it?
Well, in Mike Jones fashion, that's what you're supposed to do. And we're going to ask I'm going to ask both of you all for solutions in very, very short order. So, Dr. Alexander, I'm sorry for delaying your response.
No, and actually, what Mike Jones just said is kind of it. It's like, so some people, so it looks like it looks like it gives the appearance that you'll be like, well, why is this person? So we all experience XYZ, right? And so you're like, so why is this person able to cope and this person isn't? We all saw the same thing. Well, we probably did all see the same thing, but we didn't all come from the same frame of reference. And so like one of those things that impacts the frame of reference and kind of what Mike is alluding to, like, so did your parents do X, Y, and Z? Maybe your parents didn't do X, Y, and Z, right? Like now, we're in a situation now where every kid who participates gets a ribbon. That is not good. That is not good. You can't get a ribbon for participation. You're supposed to get a ribbon because you won, and you might get something because you came in second place, but you can't get a ribbon because you played. And so that goes in. So that builds resiliency, right? And you play till you win. What is that? That's reps, right? And so, and if you didn't win, what do you got to do? You got to film study, right? We got to figure out why we didn't win, and then we got to correct that, and then we got to go play again. But this thing where we ain't keeping score, like how you play a game and you don't keep score, right? we ain't keeping score, and everybody gets rewarded. That doesn't build resilience. It doesn't create discipline. Not in and of itself. It certainly could if done in an intentional manner, but just because you do it that way, because you don't want, kids' feelings to be hurt, it doesn't build resilience. And so it can start in those kind of situations. It can, children don't have the ability to put everything into the right terms, right? They don't come into this world knowing how to express themselves. And so when they don't get their way, we can see frustration. So we can see pouting, we can see yelling, screaming, tantrums, whatever. We got X number of parents, but we could be at extremes in our parenting. So we got a parent on the one end that has no tolerance for the behaviors of the child, And instead of shaping the behaviors of the child, or even in a poor effort to shape the behaviors of the child, they abuse the child, right? Then on the other hand, you got a parent who has no tolerance for the behavior. They just give in. Child is tantrum. I want candy. I'm laying on the ground. I'm kicking, screaming. But I don't want to. I don't want to deal with this. It's embarrassing. Here, have a candy. Well, now for that kid, that's problem solving. If I tantrum, I get what I want. Right? Now you're not building no reps, no resilience, no nothing. It's my way or no way. On the other end of that spectrum, again, you have the child that's, that ends up being abused. That child tries to figure out ways to suppress, his or her, emotions and thoughts and da 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 da. Now, you got somebody in the middle who helps their child express how they feel and, make whatever they perceive to be the necessary request in an appropriate way, right? And so we need more folks in the middle. There's a lot of reasons why you got folks at the extremes, but they exist. And so that, that kind of becomes a challenge, but that's why some people have resilience and some people don't, right? It's, a lot of times, folks will be, oh, he just built like that. Well, no, it's probably he was shaped. That's how he or she was kind of brought up. And, whether or not the parents did it intentionally or not, they did it in a way that, the child was able, to kind of learn, da 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 da. Now, in either of those other two options, you might have some exceptional kids who kind of figure it out along the way, so like that child on the end where where the abuse and the neglect is occurring, that child can figure out, that it's not that I can't express myself, is that I can't express myself to him or her. And so they might shut themselves off to that parent or those parents, but may have the ability to connect with somebody else. But that still requires that whatever adult that they decide, whoever it is that they decide to confide in, that person has to have established themselves as a trustworthy person.
Charles,
For
Let
that child to confide.
me ask this real quick. Is there a difference between the bear that you've described in the past, and if you would describe that, and an ace?
No, there's not. It's um, the bear could be an ace, right? And so I describe the bear as a trigger, right? So the bear is something that evokes anxiety, or it evokes some kind of mood or anxious response. And so for me, the bear is public speaking, right? And so every time that I do this, what we're doing, I'm literally poking the bear. But I feel better every time I do it because I need the reps. And so part of the reason I do it is because I need the reps. But I'm clear that that's a thing. Now, it's funny because like when I'm actually live talking to folks, like they think I'm working the crowd, right? But I'm working the crowd because I can't be still. That's pure that's pure anxiety. And so like I walk to this part of the stage, I walk to that part of the stage, I look to the back of the wall, people be thinking I'm making all this eye contact. I am scared to death. And so and they, oh, he is so cordial and da da da. No, that's not what it is. That's how I manage the anxiety. Because if I just stood still, I would start shaking, literally. And so I know that that's the bear. And so I ultimately had to come up with some strategies to manage it.
Thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. Yeah, that's incredible. Mike Jones, go ahead. I don't want to delay you any
Now,
further.
this is fascinating for me as a layperson who thinks about stuff, but none of the technical training. And as Charles was talking this last time, I thought of a phrase that we all hear because he was talking about the interaction between the child and the parent. And that made me think of the phrase we always use. It takes a village to raise a child. And that when you think about the community we used to have, and I would suggest if you remember when your first child was born, and you brought the child home, and either your mama or her mama was there, or when they first came, and the older women would say, "Give me that baby." Okay, because implicit in that was you don't know what to do with this yet. Okay, you had it, you brought it here, but give me that baby. And so there were these informal rituals. And then when you start thinking about when you go out of the house, your tent, into the village, and there are these other people in the village that compensate, contribute, and that environment was really I didn't now sometimes think about it, but you don't think about it while you're doing it, and you don't think about it as a young parent. But for us, that was a child-centric environment, not perfect, not always safe or welcoming, but it was a child-centric environment that as safe as it was possible to be. It was a safe environment for children to figure out how to matriculate into adults. Some did real well, some didn't. But on balance, it produced functioning adults. But it was the village because there is three things I think if you I know if you're old as me, and I'll say even at least as old as you guys, that in that environment, if you got to be as old as we are now and as successful as we are, there are two things you heard regularly. This ain't for you. Time for y'all to go. That was the village. That was all elements of the village saying, no, we got something for you. And there's a third thing that you were the beneficiary of that you weren't aware of, because you just thought it was all about you were doing this all on your own. Somebody said, don't mess with them. Okay. So that you're walking around here okay, because somebody who mattered, who could matter, said, don't mess with them. The way I would say it is, the village recognized, here's some dogs that can hunt, puppies that can grow into big dogs. And we're going to give them a chance to be big dogs because we need big dogs. And you weren't cuddled, but you were insulated from things, and you had to actively get outside of that. So all of us are a product of the structural integrity of the village. And that's and I use structural integrity the way engineers use structural integrity. Okay, that the thing does what it's supposed to do. You know, like a building, a house can be condemned. It looks like a house, but it ain't safe to go in it because it lacks structural integrity. And literally, that is what has happened to us as a community, as a people. The structural integrity that allowed us to survive for 250 years in America we've lost that. It's been this simple because we managed all of these traumas way worse historically than the ones we have now. And we basically came through them in one piece, not undamaged, but fundamentally in one piece, functioning and kept getting stronger and better. And over the last 40 years or so, we've given all that away. But and Charles, because now we have more science and people study it, we have names for it, and we got all of these individual therapies to say that you as an individual need to be treated like this. When before we had a culture that was designed to help children evolve into fully functioning adults to the best of their ability. Not that everybody made it, and not that you got there at 100%, but you can look at it like this. If you hit 300 for 20 years and get 3,000 hits, you're going to end up in the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame.
It's one of the best hitters of all time.
The best that ever did it. You Tony Gwynn.
And they got you out twice as many times. When Stan Musial got asked, Jack Buck asked him when he got his 3,000 hits in Chicago, he said, Stan, what does it mean to get 3,000 hits? He said, it means they got me out 7,000 times. Okay, so this ain't about batting 1,000. It's really about being a consistent 300 hits, and particularly with runners on base. Okay, so that's the standard that we're using, and those kind of things used to get passed on in the culture. And now all of that, and that was part of the cohesion and integrity that we had, that we wouldn't have survived without it. And I think that's a layperson deductive reasoning from a general to a specific, but I'll kind of stand on it.
I'm not sure you qualify for a layperson, but the Africana framework, what you just described, was a governance structure. Which what I know about it, what I know about an Africana framework, you can put in a thimble, but a governance structure, which is what we are to each other, is what you and social structure is what we are to other people. You can still, I laughed yesterday. I went and saw one of our schoolmates' sons plays for Cardinal Ritter. This is his senior year. And I looked at the way that the younger players are being, brought along by the older players and the deference that they gave them. You don't see that very often anymore, but it's very, very clear over there. But what they are to one another, there was respect, there was deference, there were instructions that came from the older kids that were adhered to strictly by the youngsters. So I just found that to be interesting. But go ahead, Dr. Alexander. It looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, I asked my dad, so my dad, if anybody had adverse childhood experiences, it was that guy. I have no reason to believe that my grandparents were other than two people that hooked up. I have no nothings that tell me that they had an actual relationship. So my grandfather didn't acknowledge my dad until my dad was an adult. My dad, so that's one ace, right? So that's one ace. My dad's mom died on his 3rd birthday. That's 2 aces. My great grandfather said he got to go. He can't stay here. right? That's 3 aces. Now, my great grandfather actually lost that battle. My great grandmother won that battle, and so he stayed there. But my great grandfather was a mean old cuss. He had put all his kids out the house at 16. You got to go. And so, but what my dad, once it was established that, grandma wasn't going to let this baby go nowhere, kind of this was literally one of those situations, Mike, where, give me that baby. And so it was literally that. But it also gave my great grandfather a second chance. He was an awesome grandfather. But guess what? He died when my dad was 6. So by the time my dad was 6, he had a minimum of 3 aces. Right? And so I asked him one day, and I was like, so how you turn out to be the guy that you were? He said, your dad abandoned you, and, y'all ain't have no bunch of money. He was, my grandmother, so the village, my dad moved around so he could go to school. But every time he moved, somebody got ill and passed. It was some instability in whatever relative he went to, there was some instability in that household, and he would have to go somewhere. So all of those are aces, loss, this, that, or the other. And so I asked him, I said, so how you ain't end up being some street dude? He said, I knew right from wrong. He said, Grandma has some rules and some expectations. He said, I knew right from wrong. And he said exactly what Mike just said. He said, and those street dudes would say, at a certain time of the day, this ain't for you. At a certain time of the day, the street dudes would be like, Pete, no, you go home. And so everything that Mike just explained is what my dad explained is the way he grew up to kind of be the guy that he was for us, right? And so here we are today, and we say, oh, the father ain't there. The father ain't never been there. that ain't no phenomenon that started now. This what we've been doing. Mike Potter. So the reason we even having this conversation about aces is because I did a presentation on Frederick Douglass's aces, and
that I strongly recommend everyone.
And so Frederick Douglass's first ace is what? He's born into slavery, right? But the remarkable thing about Frederick Douglass, and you hit on this, and so like now we got all of these therapies. That side noise is my dog drinking water. Now we got all of these therapies and we got all of this stuff, but that don't mean that this is when this stuff started. Post-traumatic stress didn't start because of the Holocaust. It was already there. Frederick Douglass lays this stuff out. But if you're not reading it for that, you don't get it that way. I had read that book, 2 or 3 times. And somewhere in my Black History Month thinking this, I was like, I need to read for ACEs. And so I did that. And same content, different lens, right? And so if that guy could have gone through that, and he's not saying he came through this thing unscathed, he is saying that he learned how to manage. And so we have gotten to this point where we like kind of giving in, right? And I know we're looking at the trauma response, but some of the stuff is we just giving in. And we got to double down and we got to fight. We literally have to fight back, and that is, and so there's another ideology now called politicized healing, and so That's literally what you saw Frederick Douglass do. When Frederick Douglass is talking about reading, he's like, when I was clear that my master didn't want me to read, I wanted to learn to read more because he got some thoughts about me, right? And that's how we got to go about this thing. If these jokers don't want us to vote, we got to vote. They don't want us to vote, and we be like, oh, shit, I ain't voting. They win. What are you doing? That's like second place getting the ribbon. That's like third place getting the ribbon. You just giving them the win. We got to fight. And so, so taking that second look and that third look in the past 2 weeks. So I love audiobooks. In the past 2 weeks, I have listened to the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass 3 times, front to back, because I'm trying to pick up these jewels in terms of how this guy managed adverse childhood experiences and then turn that into being one of the greatest statesmen that this place has ever known. Because it's instructive.
Yeah, like I said, this is we have for me, this is profound, because I agree with you that when I was young, my brother and I had this conversation, because he's rereading some stuff too, and he said, as a matter of fact, he's rereading Miles' Little Red Book, and we was talking about in the 60s, you could absorb it and repeat all of it. And then you get to be 70 plus and you go back and read it and say, oh, I get it now. Okay. So these things, Larry, one of my favorite shows was Paper Chase. I used to always want to watch the beginning to hear John Houseman as Professor Kingfield say, you come in here with a skull full of mush, you teach yourself law, I'm going to train your mind to think like a lawyer. And there is something to that. And to your point, Charles, if really, with that long setup, the point that I want to make, 40 years of problem solving in politics and government, by the end, when there was a big issue or problem and people say, well, what are you going to do? Or what are we going to do? I had a strategy, one strategy that spoke to every problem. As long as we got clock, we gonna keep playing. I mean, it ain't really no more complicated than that. The game ain't over. As long as you don't.
That needs to go on a t-shirt. That needs to go on a t-shirt.
Yeah, we worried way too much about the score while the game was going on. Okay, the game ain't over. If you got clock, keep playing, and there's in training in the little mentoring, tutoring, coaching, whatever you do. There's an observation I made about college coaches, good college coaches, particularly, that is for 40 years watching basketball, I never paid it any attention until I got damn near this old. If you notice, when the team is down 12, 15 points with 2-3 minutes to go, the losing coach will call timeout. And he calls timeout. He starts going over some stuff on the board. And nobody has a strategy to make up 15 points in 3 minutes. One don't exist. But I tell people the reason he calls that timeout is to say, I haven't quit coaching, so you can't quit playing, because the game ain't over. And that's the point that he's trying to make. Not because we're going to win this one, but there'll come a game, there'll come a time that we'll win a game because you guys gave 100% for 40 minutes and didn't pull up short and hit the brake slow, take your foot off the pedal at 38 minutes. That it all happened in that last 2 minutes. And I have just seen that not only in sports, but in everything. He said, why did we win? We didn't quit. And it's amazing what happens when you're willing to play the whole game.
I'd like to take this into a scheme that of commerce with respect to our relationship with Africa. From a political standpoint, Mike Jones, I think that we have failed to advocate for Africa, and we have fallen for the trope that mainstream America has. Africa is just this place for benevolence. Meanwhile, all of the elite powers are extracting the resources of Africa and benefiting off of them and exploiting them. Their aid packages look like, in the public square, look like benevolence. But what we really are looking at are ill-adjusted loans that African countries are getting, and they're being forced to export goods at a price that suits the United States and those other individuals, and they're not being justly compensated for them. And the impact is that it is oftentimes localized and long-range colonialism. What and why hasn't the Black, political group, the Black community outside of our boycotting against South Africa done more and lifted ourselves up in the meanwhile?
Okay, Larry, that's a great and interesting question. And next month, Kathy and I are going to Ghana. So it'll be my first time to the continent. But in getting ready to go, and I'm particularly thrilled about going to Ghana because I'll get to visit the tomb, the resting place of both Kwame Nkrumah and W.E.B. Du Bois. So it is kind of paying homage to two of the great ancestors. But Africa, we think of Africa as one place. Africa is 3 times the size of the United States. Okay? 3 United States will fit into the continent of Africa. It's a continent. Matter of fact, all of the United States and South America will fit inside of Africa. Okay? So it's a continent. And really, as I've thought about it over the last year or so, people from the continent don't refer to themselves as Africans unless they're over here. Okay? They will tell you they're Canadian, they're Nigerian, they're Tanzanian, they're Libyan. Okay? These, and then even inside of these recent nation states, because these are not old nation states. These are all nation states that evolved from European colonialism. So these are artificial boundary lines, etc. So the reality, you have to really talk about the continent of Africa. Like, we don't talk about Europeans as such in America. The United States has a relationship with France. It has a relationship with Germany. It has a relationship with Poland or Spain. Now, those countries make up most of Western Europe, but fundamentally, they're all individual units. So one of my questions when I get to Ghana, and it's being arranged that I can talk to some government people because I'm curious about it, is explain to me, I just want to know, what's your experience of moving from colonialism to independence, particularly without a revolution? And how have you integrated, or what has that, how has the integration of these various tribal identities, how have you developed, if you have, a national identity? Because, for example, the largest indigenous identifiable group in Ghana is the Ashanti tribe. It's the most dominant, but it's not the only one. So the question is, are we Ashanti in someplace else, or something else, or we can name? I don't know the answer to that. I don't even know how they fundamentally think about that. But we are as misinformed about Africa as white people are. Okay, and that our notion of Africa, and what's interesting is by 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet is going to live on the continent of Africa. And it'll also be the youngest demographic in the world. Okay. So literally the future of the world is going to get defined someplace in there. There's something I've always thought about it, and I could be totally wrong, but I think Europe benefited from the Roman Empire. And I'm going to say that, like, the Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Empire basically subjugated all of Western Europe and parts of Near Eastern Europe. And if you look at the nation states of Western Europe today, they're really provinces of the Roman Empire. And for 1,000 years, you probably had one common language, a common culture, a common construct that took these tribal identities and created these larger identities. And I have often thought, what would have happened in the continent of Africa if they had produced a Julius Caesar, followed by an Augustus, who would have created an overarching kind of identity in it, because basically the power of European dominance, the source of European dominance in the planet for 500 years has really been the maturity of the nation state. It's just a superior form of organization to a tribe or empire. I mean, it just is, because it takes disparate groups of people and give them a single identity inside of a geography. And the only parts of the planet that have been effectively able to resist that has been Asians, Far Eastern Asians. I'm not talking about in the middle, because China's 3,000 years old.
Well, you'll find China deposited squarely in Africa now. China is carrying a bunch of the debt now of Africa, and I think that is going to be another impediment for commerce between African Americans and certain countries in Africa.
Well, what I'm saying is, but I think we need to, like Du Bois, Malcolm, Garvey, all had a theory of Pan-Africanism, and Nkrumah was a Pan-Africanist. Now, I'm not a subject matter expert. I ain't even close to being knowledgeable literally about that to articulate it or advocate one way any of the nuances. But the question becomes, what does Pan-Africanism look like, or what is it in the 21st century, as opposed to what it was in the beginning of the 20th century when the issue was colonialism and some other things. Part of it is we just don't have a theory of the case of who we are and who the world is. And that's why we can't make a lot of sense out of any of this. And that to me is what I struggle with. If we had some intellectual order that we could bring to these disparate realities, then we'd have some kind of coherent idea of what we were doing, who we were doing it with, and why we were doing it, and what we were trying to get done. And we are, intellectually, we're lost ball in high weeds. Now,
and it appears that the further from the lash, the loster we get.
right.
I over the weekend, and I think it was Dr. Alexander that mentioned this book, David Walker's Appeal. I read for the very first time.
Oh, okay. You went all the way back to the beginning again.
And I felt as ignorant as I felt like I shouldn't even open my mouth for about 24 hours. Because number one, it has been a long time since I've literally hugged a book because it was just that moving. And so, my point is that we now have gone from looking at the solutions our ancestors have laid out to trying to highlight the problem. We know what the problem is. The problem is not going to change. It's been defined. All we need to do is to go back, execute what we can, and if we bat 300, fine. We will win. But that is not, we have gotten away from that. I bet you there are more people that can tell you the fictitious Willie Lynch story than could name David Walker.
I would agree.
I bet.
I'll tell you who Martin Delaney was.
Oh, come on, man. You mentioned Martin Delaney in here again and see what happens. But, so, we've got to get back. One of you all mentioned it. I'm conflating both of you all at this point. But we've got to double down on these things. And we have become enthralled with statements like, I'm confused. That's a problem. You need to get unconfused. No, that is no badge of honor that you're confused. So, but what are the solutions as you all see them to these issues that we've talked about today? We've got two that we're dealing with. The failure of us to establish an independent, self-described, self-actuated economic commerce system internationally, and to deal with these trauma issues. If we could get solutions from both of you all on both of those, I think.
If Charles would yield for a minute, because I'm still thinking about and don't want to lose this call. There are in some of the writings, in the writing I have done since I've retired and been a columnist. Here is my fundamental theory of the case of what bothers me about why we have our problems. And the question that you're raising is, are we still a community? Are we still a people? I would posit that the enslaved Africans that came to North America, and I'm not going to deal with the whole diaspora, I'm just going to deal with North America, were made up of a disparate group of people from all over the continent. Maybe didn't have anything in common, might not even share the language or anything. What they had in common was their enslavement. And what made us a community for 200 years, 240 years, when you think about Jim Crow, 200 years of slavery, 250 years of slavery, another 100 years of Jim Crow, was white oppression. That they defined us as a community. They said this group that we brought here to rob them of their labor, dehumanized, and they took away all our identity. Whatever your identity was when you got off the boat, they got stripped of you. And we created, you could argue that Black people are the only really indigenous Americans, other than the Native American, because we had to reinvent ourselves literally whole cloth once we got here. And so our sense of community, what bounded us wasn't religion, wasn't language, it was oppression. Okay, and we couldn't escape that. What happened after civil rights and a more liberal social order, not that we were not still oppressed, the physical cohesion, the physical proximity dissipated, and we went off separate ways. And unlike Jewish people who go their separate ways, we didn't have a religion. Okay, we didn't have anything that could tie us together. Matter of fact, the religion we got, somebody else gave us. Okay, we didn't, we kind of played with it a little bit, but it wasn't even ours. So, Larry, for me, the challenge is, one, are we still a community? And we need to have that conversation. If we are, why? Now, I want to believe that we are. So I'm not saying that we're not, but what created the cohesion of this community, which was overt white oppression, doesn't exist anymore. And with that, we've kind of been like spun out of orbit and stuff. So our lack of cohesion is gone. So I literally think that's a problem. The other part of that problem that makes these times so more complex, if you're our age, there's only been one Black experience. All of us grew up the same way, which was the same way your fathers and mothers grew up, your grandparents grew up. There for 350 years, there was one Black experience. I don't care where you live. Sometimes it was tougher than others, but our music, everything, we created inside this cocoon of oppression. We created our humanity. Okay, so what nothing I would keep this culture, I embrace it. We redefined ourselves and created this humanity. Now we out in the desert after leaving Israel. Leaving Egypt. And we got false idols and everything else. It's a great metaphor. And whatever that comedy we used to have, that cohesion, that solidarity, that there are things we wouldn't do because it undermined us. Even the worst of us wouldn't do if it undermined us. And that's where my concept of the entrepreneurial politician comes from. And I'd argue the entrepreneurial public leader, whether it's civil rights or whatever. And
Academician,
yeah.
entrepreneurial academicians.
Yep. So we no longer what ties us together, and we presume because we look alike, that's supposed to do it. So we have all these disappointments and all that kind of stuff because I can't count on you like you can't count on me, and Charles can't count on neither one of us anymore because we don't have a common destiny. Okay, that your individual fate is no longer linked to our destiny, and we haven't come to grips with that in a serious academic, intellectual, thoughtful kind of way of who we are. And then we get confused about are we Americans? Now, for me, I'm a United States citizen, and that's a fact of law. I'm still holding, I have made a decision about am I American? I don't know if I want to be that, but I will claim to be a scion, an offspring of the African diaspora. And that's that's a big thing. And that has different nuances and stuff. But we don't have those conversations. We haven't talked about it, and we're trying to come up with a tactical political theory or a strategic political theory about what we do in America. And we haven't asked the existential question of Kierkegaard. Who am I? How did I get here? What's this thing called the world? Where's the director? I need to talk to him. Okay. I mean, that's really where we're at. We're at that existential moment again. And what was clarity for Richard Allen, Frederick Douglass, Du Bois, and Garvey is not clear to us now in this moment. And I think that's the guts of our problem.
Dr. Alexander.
I agree. So, yes, it is that. And so like we could go back and we could look, like this discussion, we could also find in the colored conventions. I think maybe in around 1836, they were contemplating where we should be. And like, so if we go back and we look, so the first church denomination is what? The African Methodist Episcopal Church, right? We were identifying as African, right? The first lodge in Prince Hall Masonry, the African Lodge. And so like it's all of these things that we established as African. We were connected to the peace. When you read David Walker references Africa. Frederick Douglass references Africa. We were connected, and then I think it's the in 36. And so this is this is before Frederick Douglass obviously starts to participate in the conventions. But if I'm right, in that year, or well, we can scrap that, whatever year it was, they started to have this conversation. They were trying to figure out where we should be. And the discussion got to be that they decided to call themselves colored as opposed to African, because they didn't want folks to believe that they didn't want to be here. That was a decision amongst, the self-determined leadership at the time. And so we've continued to struggle with that and similar things on until today. What can't be argued is that we are the diaspora. We are an African people. That just cannot be argued. But we certainly have folks who are in this space where it's very difficult. It's very difficult to identify with the continent and the people, and be in this place. And it's so when we look at it, so we got people who are ambivalent. We have people who have forgiven white folks but mad at Africans who were complicit in the trade. That is crazy to me. Well, they sold us. Well, some of them did, but not all of them. Some of them, but that's all of this. I mean, just the stuff that we say, it just doesn't make sense. We was kings and queens. Well, no, not all of you. It can't be that many queens. We was doctors and lawyers. No, 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 no. There were some doctors and lawyers, but we wasn't all doctors and lawyers. And we was artists. No, no, no. We wasn't all artists. We was the same traumatized people over there before we came over here. That's why most of us got
here. And Charles, could I ask you a question? Just to that point, the notion of African as an identity. Now, obviously, if you're over here, you don't know, now it's 1830, you don't know where you came from. You don't even know who you descended from. So you can pick the continent. But if I'm in Ghana, I'm Ashanti. I'm in a tribe. If I'm in Nigeria, I'm Yoruba.
Igbo.
Now, I don't know this because I literally don't know this. So, but that could be a case of neither one of them think of themselves primarily as Africans.
Well, there's a judge in St. Louis County that can look at the back of your foot and tell you what tribe you're from.
Okay.
White judge, he says he can, there's always one.
But what I'm
always
saying,
one, right?
But
there's always one.
People that we would refer to as that, because I quit doing that, and because as a matter of fact, I asked somebody, well, I said, yeah, the only time you'll really say refer to yourself as African if you're over here talking to Americans, because they ain't got no idea of how many different groups of self-identified people there are on that continent. And so it's the easiest thing for the ignorance of Americans, which is astronomical ignorance vis-a-vis we don't know, we know nothing about nothing. So it's just easier for somebody from the continent to say I'm African. Okay. And it might be second easiest to say what country I came from. But if you were to ask me, I would tell you my tribe. I would tell you that's who my identity is. And that's, and again, these are the things we kind of got. So if you really, and let's talk about Africa for just a minute. Are we talking about Patrice Lumumba's Africa, or Republic of the Congo, or Joseph Mobutu? Or are we talking about Nelson Mandela, or who was the Zulu chief? See, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, once you impose a political spectrum, and that's why the whole notion of ethnicity and tribalism can have issues with it, because now we create a familiar relationship, a clan relationship, a tribal relationship, and I got to be with your dumb ass even when you're wrong, okay? as opposed to, if these are political relationships, I get to correct you independent of our familiar connection. So it's way more complicated than just claiming something and then hanging. Now, superficially, that's easy, and we some superficial people, so that's about all we're gonna do. So what Charles is alluding to, and I think what I'm alluding to, is a whole lot of damn work. Mm-hmm. And our problem right now is we no longer have thoughtful leadership, and we no longer have thought leaders. So we don't have thoughtful leadership, and we don't have thought leaders anymore. So the people working ain't thinking, and nobody, where's Du Bois or Woodson or Allen, where or Douglas, where are the folks that are framing the question for us to say, here's what it is, and here's why it's that. And
Or,
then you can walk out of here, Larry, with a theory of the case to use
or,
a legal term.
or Woodson. We don't have a Woodson either.
Right.
But we're villainizing Africa, and we're romanticizing
Right.
America, which was founded by exile murderers, rapers, and robbers, and the Americas as we know it, and we are forgetting what we're dealing with. But let's move on to sort of the close of the show. Um, we have been blessed once again to be joined by Mike Jones, and we want to sort of move towards the end of the show today by taking advantage of one of our seasoned individuals. Mike has been through as many uh, constructive and destructive scenarios as any politician, and he's played the game at a high level. And I use the term game loosely. But what Dr. Alexander and I are going to do today is, just get some insights from Mike Jones. I'm going to
And
go.
I didn't know this was going to happen. I caught the end of them
Yeah,
talking
well,
about
that's
this.
okay. Now you know, Mike. You're the jazz artist. Now you know. Uh, so just pull one of your philosophers out, or pull one, I mean, and go with it. But I just have two quick questions as we move to a close. I just have two quick questions. Mike Jones, you are sent to to an island that of your choice. You get one song that you can listen to for the rest of your life, and you get one book. What are those two going to be?
Well, the song is probably going to be My Girl. Okay.
Is that right? Why? I thought you would have gone with something from Louis Armstrong.
No, it'll be something from the Temptations. It'll either be My Girl or I Wish It Would Rain, because the choreography, and I can vision the whole thing. Okay, so and that's my musical imprint at 16. The reason I wear glasses today is once I needed glasses, I didn't have a problem with it because David Ruffin wore glasses.
David Ruffin.
and if David Ruffin can wear glasses, I can wear glasses, and it's all right to wear glasses. So I would say the Temptations, and My Girl, or I Wish It Would Rain. And my book would be Khalil Gibran's The Prophet.
Why?
Because it's something that keeps on giving, no matter when you pick it up. It's got something, no matter what part of it you read, it's got something to say to you. And it don't take a lifetime to read it. It doesn't take whether it's the first time you read it, when I was 19, it hits you. You can read it again at 75, and you'll get something that does what great art does. It continues to give you insight and illuminates the world for you. So it would be those two things.
And the more you evolve, the more you extract from the book.
Oh yeah, that's why you can go back. That's why Charles can go back to Richard Allen. You can go back while you still play Coltrane, while you still play Miles. You can go back to the art museum to see something, because it didn't change. You're bringing more to it, and the more you bring to it, the more you can take away from it. So that's the key. It's like as you get older,
That's why your
somebody
parents
said,
get smarter over time.
yeah, well, it's like as you get older, somebody offers you a drink, and when you're young, you say what you got. When you get this age, you tell them what you drink, and if they don't have it, you don't want to drink. Okay, it's just and that's evolution. So we're talking about stuff that doesn't get old, and that's what separates art from entertainment.
Dr. Alexander. So, Mike Jones, how did you become Mike Jones?
You know what? That's interesting. first, or if you really, I actually have thought about this. My mother saved my life. What I wanted to be more than anything else was a basketball player. And I don't, wait a minute, I ain't talking about being a pro. I just wanted to be a good high school player. And I didn't have that kind of talent. But mostly, I didn't have the kind of discipline, focus, and work ethic to be that. And she made me stop playing. Broke my heart. Still, there's a little in high school, made me stop playing. And then I happened to be in college in the late 60s. I'm a teenager in 65, I'm a junior in high school, 65, 66. That's when the urban rebellion started. I don't know what I was doing when Dr. King gave the speech on Washington, but I remember like it was yesterday, stuff Carmichael on the back of that truck in Greenwood, Mississippi, talking about Black Power. And I remember Watts and Harlem and Detroit and Newark. Literally, I can name them all. And I remember that evolution there. And Starsky Wilson turned me on to Ibrahim Kendi's book, The Black College Movement. And those years between 65 and 72 that he talks about really were transformational, transformative for me. They imprinted my personality. But I still didn't have a lot of focus in anything like that. And I thought I wanted a job, and I got married and had 2 kids, and that was cool. And then I realized I didn't want to be unloading trucks at Union Electric. I was 6 hours short of the degree. And Elbert came by and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, man, we ought to be in politics. I'm running for the board, for president of the board of aldermen." And basically I said, bet, because I looked at Bill and Benny and Leroy and them. I said, well, these brothers call their own shot, and I want to call my own shot. So that's what got me started down the road. I didn't want to be ordinary. And part of the ethic that I got from my father is I got an unconditional love for Black people. That kind of got reinforced with the movement stuff. So the rest of it, the drive came from the only place I want to be on the sled is the lead dog. I'm gonna be honest about that. I mean, fun. And the other thing I got from my father is and guys like Chink Washington, don't mess with any game unless you got leverage, unless you know something about it that other people don't know. So the corporate stuff didn't have any interest in me. And coming out of the 60s into the 70s, there were a lot of people that went into politics. Marion Barry, Coleman Young. I mean, so this was where the Black talent really was ahead of me. That's where the big boys were. That's what we were following. So that's what got me into politics. And my overall economic political philosophy, I was sitting in the mayor's office in around 1998 or 2000, whenever it was. And I thought about all the stuff that I had read, philosophers and economists from Marx to, you name it. And then I realized that that's not where my politics came from. It came from a conversation I had with my father when I was about 12 or 13 in the barbershop. And he charged $1.25 for a haircut when everybody else charged $1.50. Now, he could have just been shorting the market for business. But I asked him, I said, Daddy, why do you charge $1.25 and everybody else charges $1.50? And he said something, he said something to me to stay with me my entire life. And I was 50 years old before I realized how profound the effect it had on me. He said, son, people who don't make a lot of money got to be able to get a haircut too. And I can make a living charging them $1.25. So why would I want to charge them $1.50? And fundamentally, that's been my politics for 40 years. That Larry, the preacher, would say about, I think it's Matthew 25, the least of these. And there's no honor, that it requires no skill or courage to help the powerful take advantage of the powerless. And the damn sure ain't no honor in it. So why would you want to give your life to that kind of bullshit? So that's kind of, and it just happened to work itself out. And but yeah, it was probably the period in which matriculated from adolescence to early adulthood. And then it was that imprint of my father, but not just him. You know, all the people in the village that put their hands on you one way or the other, that shape you and mold you. And I never, I believe there's a spiritual dimension to the universe, and you ignore it at your peril. And for me, it's a function of science. E equals mc squared. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just gets transformed. So I think this life force that makes up who we are in this moment, when it exhausts itself, that energy goes back into the universe. And in my mind, you get a chance to meet with your ancestors, the people who formed you, the village that sent you, and you see them for a moment, like in Black Panther. And my feeling is my mother will be happy to see me in pressure, because Black mothers unconditionally love their sons. So I couldn't have made no mistake. But my father and stepfather and them, because it ain't just my father and stepfather, they'll look at me and pause for a moment. And then they'll give an opinion. And I've always wanted that opinion, them to say these words: well done, welcome home. We have a place for you at the high table. And I said, I wanted to live my life in a way that I would never compromise that moment. So there's really nothing nobody's got for me here that's bigger than that. And I also owe Jimmy Matthews something. I had retired and was down at City Hall, and he was going on ranting about running for mayor or something else. And I was politely not listening. And then he just stopped in the middle of his screed. And he said, Michael, what are you doing now? And I said, Jimmy, I ain't really doing nothing. A little this, a little that, right, a little bit. And then he said something that shook me to my core. He said, shame on you if you leave here and don't nobody else know what you know. And it really changed my thinking, because I now understood that moment I was hoping for. When I meet the ancestors, I wasn't going to get it, because they just said, yeah, the work, you did good work, but it was something you left undone. And what you left undone, you didn't teach what you were taught. So part of this for me is making sure whenever I go home, I'm empty. And I left it all back here. But it ain't about here. It's about what I want to believe will be that other moment that has nothing to do with this moment, except if you do this right, you get that.
Get that. Thank you, sir.
Well, that is the close of this show. Mike Jones, in his own words, outstanding question, Dr. Alexander. If you all want to tune in to just a tutorial on ACEs, tune into the CEN YouTube channel and pull up the show with Dr. Alexander. This is the level set. We may be found under the level set on YouTube as well. If it's the Lord's will, we will look for you all next week. And thank you for tuning in.